All right, everybody. Welcome to Theory Underground. Today, we're joined by the Big Signorelli, a.k.a. Master Sig, or the Big Sig.
The Big Sig.
Andrew Flores. How you doing, man? Welcome.
I'm good. The other half of Vanishing Mediator. Vanishing Mediators was it 1/4 of the young Žižekians, right? Yep. Good to be here. It's been a while since we recorded.
Yeah, man. I guess
I'm excited.
So this is going to go straight up on the channel. So what's up, everybody on the channel side? I'm obviously your regular host, David McKerracher. But Andrew's obviously been a long time fellow traveler, been around since the launch of Theory Underground back in December. And he was a part of the 2-day marathon event that happened a couple months ago. But what happened, Andrew? What happened to your presentation?
Yeah, we had some technical difficulties prior to starting because you lost Wi-Fi, and then you went to the cafe and they had a power outage, but we ended up recording and making it successful. But however, we found out that YouTube doesn't go past 12 hours of recording, so we lost mine and I think a couple other recordings, right?
Yeah,
from the two-day marathon.
Right, most of Tony from One Dime, his stuff got cut off, and so we lost.
Yeah, and I was right after Tony.
Yep. And we didn't know that YouTube doesn't keep anything past the 12-hour mark. So, this is just bringing you back so that you can actually give the presentation again. But of course, there's no such thing as just giving the same presentation. It's going to be a whole new beast. But
right. Yeah. What does Dave Chappelle say? It's the remix edition.
This is the remix edition. And so, I guess I'll just say therapism is a topic, something that we're critical of at Theory Underground. That's been a sort of theme, a through line. And the young Žižekians, I think the first time we assembled was to do that conversation about Jonah Hill's documentary Stutz, which was basically about his therapist. And so this is sort of like the ultimate expansion pack on that, right?
Right, because it was the Jonah Hill's documentary on Stutz that really spearheaded like the term therapism for Theory Underground and why it's important for ideology critique, and that it's a very imminent thing that's going around, and especially with the whole Jonah Hill thing that's going around on Twitter with him and his ex, and the whole discussion of like him using therapy to manipulate her and all that. But without going on a tangent of that and really getting off the topic, the point is that therapy culture, and I know like someone like Ashley Frowley uses the term the semiotics of happiness and mental hygiene as a way to control the working class and kind of like obfuscate really systemic things that are going around like collectively. Someone that I'm really inspired by, Dwayne Roussel, always talks about that there is a lack and foreclosure in the social bond. And so really one of the things that we cling to, if it isn't like drugs, addictive substances or something like that, or any sort of niche community, is that we use things like therapy, new age spirituality, and this hyper individualization of like, taking care of yourself, optimizing yourself, being your true self, as a way to cope with the disenfranchisement of the political sphere, the dissolution of the social bond, and with a lot of the things in our consciousness that are due to the reproduction of capitalism. It has nothing to do with the fact that, you're just overly pathological. It's that this sort of discourse takes on its form. And this is the key thing of my essay. So the two key things is, one, that what therapism is a new form of super egoic enjoyment to help cope with the lack of the social bond and create like a new master signifier, a new master. And it tells you to enjoy, to optimize yourself, to be yourself, enjoy being happy. And secondly, that like this essay should like I always compare it to what Daniel Tutt says about his book on the politics of the family. Rather than say what the family ought to be, it gives us a new way for the left to talk about the nuclear family. I want my essay to be like a new way for the American left, or just the discourse in America, to talk about psychoanalysis in a new light, because we're the ones that are kind of struggling. Psychoanalysis is not that big in America like it is in Europe and France, and even in South America, especially politically. It's always seen as something that's a pseudoscience, or for any leftist or Marxist, it's bourgeois science. But I want to beg to differ and actually put psychoanalysis on the forefront with Marxism or ideological critique, and also in its material efficacy as a practice and a praxis to spearhead a new understanding of looking at the social bond, of looking at the capitalist climate, and our own subjectivity when we fail to symbolically coordinate, or as Frederick Jameson says, cognitive mapping. Like when we fail to assimilate our ego ideal and we have trouble, our failed interpolation, that's the psychoanalytic subject that is in question. Madame Delard talks about, Madeleine Delard has an essay called, it's a critique against Althusser, and he specifically says that the failed interpolated subject is the subject of psychoanalysis, the one that is trying to question, what does it mean to enjoy? What does it mean to be a man or a woman? What am I? This traversal to the fundamental fantasy is exactly the subject that is both the subject of psychoanalysis, but also the subject in question for a future proletariat. So that's what I have to say for right now. Does anybody have any, or do you have any input, Dave, before I keep going on about specifically the essay?
Right. So your main two things, just to see if I got it right, is first of all, that therapism gives the subject a new master signifier. And two, that therapism, one of its functions is to discredit psychoanalysis as a pseudoscience.
So no. It is one. So the first one is right. It's that it's a new master signifier, but mainly it's a sort of inversion. It's a superego enjoyment off of the failure of anything else within capitalism. And I'll go into more of that within the essay. But secondly, I want to give a new opportunity for psychoanalysis to be talked about as a discourse that can act as a critique against not only therapism, but capitalism, especially since psychoanalysis as an institution is in its infancy in America compared to, Western Europe, South America, especially Lacanian, Freudian. It's really big over there. And then even other parts where it's growing. But America has always seemed to privilege behaviorism or other forms of therapy. And in the essay, I say that it's like pretty much behaviorism, even though it privileges behavior habit, kind of in its way that it's practiced, and these certain tools and stuff are created by a presupposition of the ego. So it is like an inversion of ego psychology. So ego psychology, in a sense, is like a vanishing mediator, even though they don't call it ego psychology, because ego psychology is actually a form of psychoanalysis, watered down psychoanalysis that wishes to locate the defense mechanisms in the ego that are causing suffering and kind of reestablish like a harmony or solidity to make you more resilient to, like, for lack of a better term, the reality principle, right? So that's what I meant, is that psychoanalysis should be thought of as a new possibility for us, especially in America, rather than just be like, oh, all therapy sucks. We just need to be ourselves. We just need to find some outlet to not destroy ourselves. But it's like, no, psychoanalysis shows that we're always undermining ourselves, even when we want to criticize the status quo and try to be different, try to be alternative, that we end up sort of being hijacked by capitalism, but also that we're still kind of performing our own sort of enjoyment, an injunction to enjoy, because capitalism and its superego, enjoy, be yourself, be alternative, be different, still adheres to sort of a commodification.
Right. And I want to be able to ask a few questions about some of the things that you brought up that I think probably to the average listener sound fine. but it sounds like you're taking issue with them, and so we'll want to drill into those. But I think a lot of that will come out of your talk, and so I want to kind of just set you up. I want to set you up to go into that, but really quick. So you had brought up Ashley Frowley and the semiotics of happiness, and I was thinking, I don't get the impression that she makes this distinction between therapism on the one side and psychoanalysis on the other, as like psychoanalysis actually has the tools to be able to critique therapism. Instead, I think she kind of would just lump it all together as something that's psychologizing. And so the issue with psychologizing is that it always detracts from this broader socioeconomic and political level of critique, her material analysis. And so
no, that's a good point, because a lot of people want to dismiss psychoanalysis as psychologizing or subjectivizing, but psychoanalysis is not dealing with a private consciousness. It's not dealing with the subject as far as like in the traditional philosophical sense, this private individual, this thinking, doubting subject. No, it's actually the subject for psychoanalysis is the subject of the unconscious. And to clarify that, the unconscious, again, is not something that's internal with us, this private denizen of, animalistic instincts and cravings or sexual desires. The unconscious is rather, or the subject of the unconscious is rather an effect of language. If I can evoke Wittgenstein, he has pointed out that there is no such thing as a private language, but to be Lacanian, language is rather structured by the entire symbolic order, the order that we're in. And we could call this order capitalism, right? We could call it that. We could call it class struggle. He takes symbolic order from Claude Levi-Strauss. So Levi-Strauss is thinking the symbolic order or the structural society as like kinships, families, alliances, but they all, no matter what orientation it is, run around a law. So for Lacan, it's law that is, privilege, the prohibition of enjoyment. So when we deal with the law, we're always dealing with a prohibition and what is enjoyable. And that creates a subject, that creates a virtual subject, your ego ideal, right, of who we're supposed to be in relation to the other. But we can never fully fulfill that role because it's like we're always a little too late. We're always anticipating. So there's a part of us that fails that. And for us, we should say the average person that goes to psychoanalysis is usually a neurotic or hysteric. They want to know what it's like to live, to enjoy, what it means to live a life of enjoyment, to be cured, because they have a hard time. And the point is that though it appears that we're dealing with a sort of therapeutic structure in which you have a person lying on the couch with another person, the analyst, that's writing stuff down, interpreting, we're not, in a sense, giving these people tools. We're not telling them how to live. We're listening to them and realizing that there's something other that speaks and not the sort of conscious person. I mean, you're aware of this, Dave, the subject of enunciation versus the subject enunciated. So it's not the person of the statement, but rather of the enunciation. And this is where we get the unconscious. This is where we get the slips of the tongue, the parapraxeses, the forgetting of names. These moments of speech effect is when the subject, the barred subject, the lacking subject speaks, which is not, again, a privatized individual, but rather something that is the effect of language that is like, think about it like in the glitches of a video game, in the glitches of this continuum of what we call ideology or the symbolic world. And that's what psychoanalysis deals with.
And it's not just that repressed self. Because it's outside of itself. It's extimate in that sense that it's actually, it's caught up in that symbolic order. It's caught up in that language. It's caught up in its context. And so it's like the conscious, rational, pleasure-seeking ego is not just atop a repressed, reservoir of id impulses that keep getting shoved down. For Lacan, this empty subject, this void of that is beneath that conscious ego, it's caught up in all this extimate shit, right?
Yeah. And so like the constant effects of the analyst interpreting these moments and when the subject of the unconscious arises, you get a quilting point in which, the subject is trying to speak something through these punctual moments in which, all right, we'll stop right here because you said these important signifiers, this constant theme of repetition. Then we get a sort of quilting of like, this is what the subject is supposed to be saying. It's a subject that speaks, not a subject that is sort of ontological, right? A sort of privileged cogito. It's something, again, that's the effect of language. And we're not talking about a private language, and something that has a sort of ethical aim, a drive towards, right? Lacan will say this in I think it's Seminar 7, that the unconscious, or I think it's desire or drive, has a sort of ethical aim to it rather than an ontological status.
What is the ethical aim of drive?
Well, the way I understand it, especially when we look at the game Fort Da for now. So this is a little out there, a little esoteric, ethereal. So for those of you who aren't aware of it, so this is a sort of tape that is jotted down in Freud's seminal text Beyond the Pleasure Principle, when he first develops his notion of death drive or death instinct. So he has a grandson who is given to him by his daughter, and she leaves, and she constantly leaves. And the baby doesn't cry. And back then you have these, you used to have these sort of, what are they, that babies sleep in, they're like the beds with the little frames, and they used to have a little cover over it, but this one didn't have it. So he could see his mom leaving. And so rather than crying, Freud noticed that like the baby would play with toys and throw them and be like, ooh, and then pick them back up and like make another noise. And then as he got older, what he would do is he would play with this little casting reel, silk reel, and then like he would toss it and then he would say da and bring it back and he would say for. So what he's doing is he's trying to master the scene in which the mother separates from him, not to recreate the scene in which he has the mother, but actually recreate the scene in which it's like, no, I'm going to fail on my own time. This is a scene of failure. So what the drive does is it aims at failure, but it's like, I knew I fail in this moment. Rather than trying to succeed, I want to fail the way I want to fail and not how circumstances have made me fail, if that makes sense.
No,
so the drive is
totally makes sense.
Recreating the scene. And in Seminar 2, the real for Lacan is impossible real, in which we should think of the symbolic order like a machine that is constantly reproducing like an algorithm, but it has to kind of like go back to its starting point, and it can't account for a lot of the contradictions. So it's pretty much like a glitch, a contradiction that is self-imposed. So it's like the drive in our symbolic order is like this impossible aim that we're constantly being driven by, an impossible enjoyment that will never happen. So we're built upon a contradiction. And so we could think of it like that, in which even within that we learn. So the whole kind of axiom that he proposes in there is that the truth arises from error. He compares analysis in its form to the Meno, in which Socrates has Meno's slave boy do some geometrical problems. All he needs to know is that the slave boy knows Greek, and he asked him to like double the square, and he doubles it more than or he quadruples it. He doesn't double it, and then since he realizes that he quadrupled it, then he's able to kind of reduce it down to get to the right answer of whatever the formula is. But what he says is that like, there's a sort of truth that arises from the missed encounter, the mistake. And so in analysis, we learn to realize what our repetition compulsion is from the already set failure, the accumulation of amount of failures that we have in our life, undermining ourselves.
Damn. So Theory Underground is probably just me purposefully failing in my own way rather than failing how society has told me to fail.
Right.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'm just sitting here, I'm just like, damn. But so now I want to immediately follow up with a question about ego psychology, because you did characterize it, and you did kind of speak to the issues with it, but it was kind of in a bigger point you were making about something else. And so I kind of thought maybe let's hone in on that for a second. And so just what's the shortest version, the shortest sort of either definition or description you could give to to what ego psychology is? Yeah.
So like I said, ego psychology comes from psychoanalysis. It's actually something that was created by Anna Freud. And to kind of reduce it down to something simple, it's two-body psychology, in which you have a therapist and a patient, like any other form. But the point is that it's worried on this like imaginary level of self-relating. And Lacan gives this example of in seminar one, since in the beginning, he's critiquing a lot of ego psychology. Anna Freud with a patient who's very anxious and has a lot of like animosity with her mother. And so she starts to kind of fidget and react during the session. And Anna Freud kind of like reacts and says like I hope like, you know, I'm not doing something to make you think that I'm like your mother. And she's like, of course not. Why would you? This is the instance in which we try to relate and double down with the patient's sort of feeling towards the analyst, rather than taking it further and sort of questioning the interpretation or the fantasy and the language that comes about from that. She's focused more on the sort of affective dimension and the ego's position to strengthen it, to contain it, maybe. And other forms of psychodynamic psychotherapy want to create a room that acts like as a container to contain all the projections and positions that the ego's in, and sort of, for lack of a better term, solidify it. I'm kind of like doing a little straw manning, but you could look at any form of psychodynamic ego psychology or any form of two-body psychology. This is what they do. They tend to talk about what we call transference, which I could explain later, but as creating a space of containment in which all these sort of affects and emotional dimensions of traumas, of triggers, to be related onto the analyst and to work through them. We could even go so far to talk about object relations, which is another form of psychoanalysis by Klein and Winnicott, in which it's like there is an ego, but it's not like libidinally invested. It aims towards an object relation, which is quite dubious, because it's like, what the fuck is an object then? You know, it's like we could go back to philosophy 101 versus like the subject and object dichotomy. It's like they take that as a presupposition, but never explain it. Just say that the ego and its object is a given. And Lacan puts that into question. It's like, this is another dubious form of ego psychology, even though he doesn't really call it that. It's like we kind of can imply it's like, you know, we want to have a healthy ego with the object relation, because otherwise it puts itself.
So far you've talked about object relations. You've also talked about Anna Freud. Was there another one that you had just mentioned? Is there three so far?
Yeah, so like pretty much Anna Freud is the like founder of ego psychology, from my understanding, and she's of course Freud's daughter, but ego psychology comes from her. And it, again, like what I said, it's a two-body method of psychology, and it focuses on what Lacan would call an imaginary dimension of psychoanalysis, in which we only pay tribute to the ego's relating towards the analyst. And he even makes this key. It's like, well, what is the ego then? The ego that's in question is not the analyst, but not the analyst, and sorry, that was a Freudian slip, but the analyst. The analyst makes themselves the role model of a healthy ego. So it's like, you know, the analyst imposing their own ego onto the unhealthy ego of the patient and saying like, this is how you'll be when you come out, you mirror me type thing.
And so what's the problem with this? Why is that a problem?
The problem is that for Lacan, this is not the Freudian project. What we get is just a sort of we steer away from psychoanalysis and its project and what Freud is getting at, but also it just goes to show that this is something that pays tribute to the sort of social order in which we need to rehabilitate and make you a healthy member, citizen of society, and not realize, like, I think even though Lacan is taken as like the sort of charlatan or like somebody who's like apolitical or even like a conservative, is definitely dealing with the sort of social order that could put into question the political nature of it. And you know, he talks about in Seminar 17, the discourses and how like we all want a master. and how the analytic discourse proper shows how there is no master, and it kind of allows you to, for the first time, not enjoy and realize that there is no master within you that you could call for. There is no God, that you could adhere to, because it's literally just the unconscious trying to reconcile with the big other. There is no big other that's going to satisfy your desires. You can chase for all you want. And this is what we see therapy kind of doing, is creating like a big other for you, a safe haven for you. And he won't say this, but in my opinion, ego psychology, behaviorism, all they do is just band-aid up these conditions and contradictions in your subjectivity that are rooted in capitalism, and say that it's all internally just because of something within you, some a lack of serotonin. You're just not satisfied with your life. You're not fulfilled. Let's give you some better coping mechanisms, some good tools, new outlooks in life. Have you tried new hobbies? And then once you kind of jot down that grocery list, then you could go back into society and be normal like everybody else.
Right.
And that's not what Lacan is doing. Lacan sees something, because like, I even think like when you look at like young like early Lacan, he noticed that there was this sort of impulse that people had. And I think it was in psychotics as well, but like in other people, in which he called it self-punishment, in which like he gives this example of this woman who steals, but then like feels so guilty that she reports her own self to the authorities. And so like this is what kind of makes him question like what the nature of like that is, and resorts him towards psychoanalysis and rather from psychiatry. So you're already talking about somebody who was in psychiatry, who was dealing with his own form of therapism at the time, and then adhering to the Freudian project and saying like, this is what we need to go back to. So yeah, that's, I hope that I answered your question, but like, that's what I think is wrong with it, is pretty much that, like, from my perspective, it's just like, let's give you a bandage and give you this grocery list of do's and don'ts, and then you'll be healthy, you'll be good, and for Lacan, he would even say that behaviorism or ego psychology of trying to make you healthy and conformative is not the way to go. He says something, it's a paraphrase, but he says something about behaviorism in the essay in the Acree called Function of Field and Language in Psychoanalysis, which is a 1953 essay that he gives in Rome right before Seminar 1. His critique of behaviorism is the fact that it wishes to create a model of adaptation in which we have a picture perfect, healthy, well-adapted individual. And that's what everybody needs to model. And we can see the same thing happening today. The perfectly modeled cognitive behavioral therapy subject that knows their cognitive distortions, that knows that any feeling that they have is probably a trigger. Their sense of justice, it's like, oh no, that's like, that's just relative. It's like, yeah, you have your own form of justice, but everybody else has. Or if you're seeking truth, but that's just you trying to seek your own personal meaning. So like any sort of philosophical inquiry or sense of justice, sense of like what is right or wrong, is just reduced down to a cognitive distortion that you need to like adapt, because you got to realize that everybody has their own unique truth into them. And rather than do that, just worry about making yourself mentally healthy. And I touch upon that in my essay too. So I've already said something in my essay that like pretty much like this notion of behaviorism and therapy reduces any sort of like questioning about sense of social justice or just justice in general, philosophical inquiry of truth and knowledge, just to, a bad perspective, you're not seeing the whole picture, and it's truly about what your own meaning is.
Right. It's kind of like it's so ego psychology is about imaginary identifications, but imaginary is here being used in this broader Lacanian register sense, which is to say it's the perceivable. Yeah, it includes the imaginary, but also includes the perceivable. And so we perceive ourselves in the mirror and we think, that's me. And then we go through life and we make identifications where we go, I like this and I don't like that. And then we go, oh my God, I have a problem. I keep doing this one thing and it keeps getting me in trouble. Or it makes it so I can't even go to work. And so I got to go get help for this. And so you go try to get help for it. And they go, okay, this comes down to like a problem with your self-esteem. Or this comes down to a problem with your behavior, and you just need to change your behavior, or you just need to tell yourself these mantras every morning, or XYZ. This is the laundry list component that you're talking about. This is the okay, we'll develop this specially tailored laundry list of things for you to be working on. But and I think this is probably something from our previous conversations that I want to bring in right here, but is to say that ego psychology, in developing this laundry list for people, is ultimately telling people, here's a bunch of things to do that you already knew. And not only did you already know that these are things that you're supposed to do, but also knowing and being told to do these things doesn't really change anything, because you already knew that you're supposed to be doing things different. But that doesn't change the fact that your drive is getting off on fucking up that laundry list of things that you're supposed to be doing. Yeah. And so a lot of your neuroses and a lot of neuroses and pathologies are actually spiraling out from the fact that you're already taking what you should be doing to heart, and you're taking it to heart more seriously than anything. And so, like, going through therapy, you're just being told, oh, well, you just need to do this more. It's like, technically you already knew that. And now, even if you were to say, get on the wagon and clean up your act and somehow get shit together for a while, the cumulative effect of not actually addressing the root cause is that you're probably going to break, and there will be some huge regression. And an example of this would be, like, you get skinny, but then you get fat again, right? Someone like Jonah Hill might be an example of that, right? He loses a bunch of weight, then he gets it all back again. And it's like, yeah, it's because you already knew what to do, but your drive formation hasn't taken on some new shape, right? And so the role of helping you realize that there is no big other, of going through a subjective destitution, of all of these things, is supposed to try to free you up in relation to those expectations.
Yeah. And you know, and it's going to be because, like, you're still going to live in capitalism, even like if you're like a subject under psychoanalysis and you realize your own symptom, your own desire, and you go through. But I think what's important to show is that, like, the way that, and it's a term called scansion, which is like pretty much how your language gets structured in analysis, when the analyst like interprets and points out, hey, you say this a lot, and pretty much points out the way that your unconscious manifests itself in speech, that when you kind of transition and sort of terminate your analysis, most patients end up becoming analysts themselves, or they become great philosophers or great artists. I know, like, in the biography that Danny Nobis is in the progress of making of Lacan, Lacan analyzed one of Picasso's lovers, and after her analysis was over, she like moved to like the countryside, became super spiritual and a successful artist. You know, so this is an example of that, without like the sort of, oh, you need to be your true self. It's just the fact that she was able to discover what she could, I guess, for lack of a better term, sublimate, you know, in her drive, and, you know, pretty much not give up on your desire. You know, don't give up on your desire. Just don't see ground or relative to it where like you pretty much end up destroying yourself from all these things that translate into different behaviors that, like, you use the term regressive, like I'll just use that loosely, but like, you know, you were skinny at one point, but then let's say like you had a, you know, fucked up situation in your life, a bad breakup, or you got fired, and then it's like, oh, now you are eating like shitty food and going out and eating fast food and being lazy, and then you become like obese and you're just like unhappy with yourself, but it's like, I can't seem to stop doing that. Or like, you know, you end up, and here's a more death drive type thing or Oedipal thing, and like where like you get out of like a very toxic abusive family, they're alcoholics, and then like, you know, you turn out fine, and then you get fired or something, and then you start becoming an alcoholic, and you end up just like your father. It's just like, well, what is the circuit of the drive in that? You know, the drive or the death drive, it has nothing to do with your alcoholism. It has to do with like, what is it that the drive is trying to aim at and master but failed, and its relation to this. Oh, why does it substitute for a lack in alcohol, right? That's the actual difference between the way psychoanalysis looks at drive and how it can latch on to this sort of metaphorization in which we get alcoholic abuse versus the way therapism talks about. It's like, oh, alcoholism as an addiction. It's just like you need to find new coping mechanisms or realize that, you're a wounded person and you need to, use these 12 steps and find better substitutes, because they put the onus on the thing itself, on the sort of substance. And I brought up this sort of thing to Nick, the other half of the Vanishing Mediators, when he asked me, like how we could think of like addiction, especially since that's like a hot topic in therapism and just like our everyday culture. It's like, oh, you're drinking too much, you might have a drinking problem, you might be an alcoholic. If we look back into like, maybe like feudal society, the Middle Ages, there were probably town drunks, right? There was even a time where in like, I think England, where they couldn't drink out of the water, so everybody had to drink beer, right? I forget when that was. Somebody could put in the comments or something, but there were no alcoholics. Alcoholism is like an interesting phenomenon that happens in our time, right? There were town drunks back then, but not alcoholics. And so this is a way in which something is at once a pathology by the DSM-5, but yet also an interesting phenomenon itself that arises. And it's due to like sort of systemic things of, to take a term out of your book, we don't have time energy, right? Mm-hmm. We don't have relative time energy. Our time energy is converted into labor power and surplus value for the capitalists. So like we're in this monotonous rat race of just wage labor, 9 to 5. We can't explore anything. Some of us don't have the means to do all these cool things that we see influencers talk about. So the average person's enjoyment is just to come home after a long day, kick off their boots, kick their feet up, watch ESPN, and just pound a fucking 6-pack. And so then we get alcoholism, because then you have to go to rehab because you're having health effects, right?
Right.
So, right. But the thing is like, if we take away that substance and then like they do something, they're still obsessive or addicted to it. Maybe it's weightlifting, maybe it's like gambling, or maybe they find something other that's destructive, or like I've seen it like anecdotally growing up in like the hood, people that get off of meth and then they become alcoholics. Like I've seen that a lot. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, is it the addictive? People say, oh, you have an addictive personality, but it's like, no, there's like a coping for a lack that they're trying not to encounter. And so they replace it by retroactively inscribing that lack that they don't want to encounter with a sort of sense of enjoyment. One of the things I critique, since we're talking about, I'm rambling on, but I'm talking about addiction. I critique Gabor Maté in my essay because he doesn't go far enough, because he says in his understanding of addiction, and he says the same thing that I said, like people put the onus on the substance, and he's right to say it's not about the substance, but why the pain. But I still think that's not going far enough, because he still focuses on this imaginary dimension of the ego relating to itself, because he cares about belonging, he cares about love and nurturing. And I'm saying, no, it's not about why the pain, but, what's the symptom? And that has to do with the level of the unconscious, in which it doesn't matter what the pain is, it's the fact that you're trying to reinscribe for a lack that isn't there. You're trying to account for yourself as a subject, but whatever is wrong with your symbolic space, your unconscious, you can't account for that. So you try new things to cope for it. And it usually does happen with obsessives, some neurotics. Not to say that all addicted people are neurotics. In some instances, I've heard from a clinician that without the alcoholism, now here's a crazy thing, without the alcoholism from their patient, that this person would have went into an episode of psychosis. So it's like this sort of alcoholic phenomenon that their ego is experiencing is fighting against the contradictions of the unconscious, in which it's being foreclosed due to psychosis.
Now, I don't think you're rambling, and I do want to turn in a moment to sort of setting up the field between Peterson, Maté, and Stutz, your main three examples throughout your piece. But before we get into it, I kind of want to clarify this idea that the pain doesn't matter, it's the symptom. And so the symptom,
right, that's a good question.
So the symptom is the cause of the pain, right? And so, but surely Gabor Maté doesn't, I mean, obviously he must care about the symptom too, right? So I just kind of want you to expand on how you're thinking about symptom and pain versus how you think he's thinking about it.
Yeah, so when he thinks about pain, he's thinking about feeling, and he always just talks about how it's a sort of physiological reaction. And so when he thinks about, and this is where I have to invoke Freud, but like for Maté, he is thinking of pain in correlation with the feeling that we get from a traumatic experience. And he's talking about a certain experience, whether it's like emotional abuse, the like physical abuse, all this sort of, unrecognition from like, an unloving family, whatever the case may be. And we got to understand that Freud himself was working through the understanding of trauma. And he goes through with like the account for like a certain experience, which is like a sort of fetishism of the experience, to the fact that we are already constitutively traumatic. Like the way our subjectivity is formed is traumatic. Now I'll get into that in a bit, but for Maté, he says that like the trauma is not just what happened to you, but it's how you internalize the event, which seems common sense, right? And in the whole trauma narrative and the way people have used it, they'll say like, well, this experience that I had was traumatic. True, whether it's like, violence, sexual abuse, all this stuff, these are horrific events, but that is not the traumatic event. What is traumatic about it is when you're in analysis and you start to give it meaning, you start to put it into language and discourse, because there are things about it that you forget. So you put new metaphors and imagery to it and recount for it. You reinscribe it through language, or you start to manifest certain things that aren't related to the actual experience, but rather are sort of like mythic way of creating it in a fantasy, in a repetition, or in a dream. And you account for a truth that wasn't present in that moment. It's very weird to describe it because it just sounds odd, but this is where we get into Freud's notion of Neutralichkeit, retroactivity. We recount for trauma not in that event itself, but how that event could actually relate to the truth of the subject, this split subject. And so in later Freud, we realize that trauma is not an event that happens to you, but rather the way you retroactively account yourself for as a subject in analysis. And, he was talking about, before the Beyond the Pleasure Principle, the understanding of war neurosis. Back then they called it shell shock, but now it's PTSD. But this constant recounting for a lack, a recounting for something that isn't there. You keep trying to put so much meaning to an event, but yet you can't account for everything. And so there's just something that is missing. And so even in analysis, somebody could be like, oh, I stopped having these sort of symptoms that I would feel that remind me when I was at like, Iraq or something like that. And yet they end up falling off the wagon. They like do some, I don't know, crazy adrenaline, activity, or they resort to alcohol abuse like most vets do. But it isn't the fact that the war was traumatic because some people go back because they want to experience that again. The war wasn't traumatic. It's the fact that the war couldn't account for something that's already traumatic about your subjectivity. That's the more controversial thing that Freud was getting at. And that's radically different from trauma in Gabor Maté, because he fetishizes the sort of event and how it's internalized versus, and we're talking about his notion of trauma is linked with addiction. Whereas the average like guidance counselor, 12-step program, bro, is all about, oh, this substance is harmful, so you just need to create healthy habits. Freud doesn't care about anything about the imaginary event, the real event, or a substance. He cares about how the subject of the unconscious cannot account for itself in any sort of narrative that tries to create an identity of who you are, right? Because what is traumatic is lack itself. We call that the real.
So the something more that can't be understood through the traumatic event.
Exactly. And because every time you talk about it, you always have to add more details to it. Things, and this is where like Lacan says the truth is structured like a fiction. It's like when you talk about a traumatic event, you don't talk about it literally. Because if you could literally talk about everything that happened, well, then, like, it wasn't that traumatic. And we forget a lot of information, a lot of details. That's the whole thing about repression, is that it always has to substitute out a lot of stuff because it can't account for this excessive part, of an encounter.
Cool, man. So this is good. I think this is a good. We've laid the field here out as far as everything's concerned with your piece. Now, the major pieces here being that you consider therapism to get. It's something that is giving people this master signifier, but that it's ultimately functioning to get people to double down on their sort of imaginary attachments, and that the tendency is for people to see psychoanalysis as culpable, as just part of therapism, as opposed to being a good critique of therapism.
Right.
And it's a good critique, and it's a good critique of therapism because of how it's a critique of ego psychology, and those two things go hand in hand.
And behaviorism, and the fact that, like, when we see psychoanalysis as a good critique, like Freudo-Marxism, looking at a libidinal economy, that therapism is, like I said, not just like something that it's like a double down on like the way you link yourself imaginarily to the social order, but that it is like a sort of super ego investment, an injunction that says no matter what, enjoy, be yourself, right?
I like it.
That's what it is, because it's a misrecognition of the law. It tries to cover down in a world that's breaking, in a failed law. Because what is law, or what is a social order, but an attempt at totality? But totalization can never happen. And so in that moment of failure, the superego comes in to say enjoy. It's that like sort of instrument of taking the law in its own hands, whether it's through transgression or just adhering to it in a misrecognized form. Because think about it like this: what is the capitalist liberal ideology want? For us to be in relation to private property, but also be individuals that pursue the free market in some way, and be ourselves, or whatever that is, in a sort of legal political standard. But we're kind of as we're in this phenomenological way of relating to it, we don't see that aspect. We just try to live the lives that we try to cope with things. And when we see how the system is falling apart, we don't adhere to that law that's told to us. We adhere to it in a diverted form, in the way the superego wants to instrumentalize it in this time of failed ideology, when we realize that the both parties that we have are trash, that inflation is off the walls, that post-COVID, which is now a new term that we could say, it's just like people are just crazy, people are just so like disenfranchised and just kept to themselves. And so the superego allows us to, for lack of a better term, instrumentalize our enjoyment, but also just adhere to the symbolic order in its own crude, perverse way, by saying enjoy no matter what. If you're not enjoying, you're not happy.
That's good.
And in therapism, that's a perfect way, because it's like your own inner freaking love and light, or like appreciate yourself. Or you have the Jordan Peterson kind of David Goggins, like who's gonna carry the boat, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, like that type of super ego as well. But it's like, even though it's a harsh, crude, cruel, demanding, like being ascetic type super ego, it still aims at an enjoyment of being the best version of yourself, right?
Are you in this moment using superego and big other synonymously?
No, so I'm saying that the superego is a misrecognized version of the law, which is the big other. Because when we try to cope for trying to create a big other, we use the superego, which this is why, in my understanding, Slavoj, in the Slovene school, they say that our ideology is perverse. And so the way that we link to this social bond is through the superego, to try to create a big other, to create a master. That's what the pervert does, is they know that there is a lack in the other, and they want to create an other for the other. They want to create a big other that could give them permission to enjoy.
Oh my God. You're complicating things for me. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. It's I I just need to get figured out on, because I understood superego to be, it's the unconscious way that your drive finds inherent transgression, basically. And
that's Seminar 7. Lacan will say this. Yes, and in Seminar 2, it's the error of understanding the law, and it insists upon this error by redoubling it and reproducing it, if that makes sense.
Okay.
By reproducing this dumb machine of a law. Okay.
Now, I think the big closeout here for the next 20 minutes should probably be something like, and that's before the Q&A, but the next 20 minutes or so should probably be something that makes the person who's listening to this want to read your paper. So you don't have to feel the need to tell everybody everything that's in the paper, but it's more like kind of sell people on what you're doing in the paper. And so I think the best way to do that is to probably introduce the listener to the main 3 figures that you are in dialogue with or critiquing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like I said, this essay, it's entitled Therapism, Psychoanalysis, and Ideology. So like the entire talk, we've been talking about psychoanalysis as the critique. And when I talk about ideology, I'm talking about it in the way that Žižek and Althusser talk about ideology, And so I talk about how therapism is a new form of ideology, a new form of discourse, but it's linked to the superego enjoyment of this injunction to enjoy, enjoying yourself, as the pursuit, and all your qualities, all your sort of virtues. And if you don't understand what they are, by just practicing these rules that, the therapist will give you, you'll understand that. And so the 3 people that I have in mind when I critique therapism are Phil Stutz, which we know as Jonah Hill's therapist and psychiatrist, Jordan Peterson, the self-help guru, and Gabor Maté. So like the sort of 3 heads of therapism. And why I pick these is just because of what they advocate. It's not that they are anything special per se, but that they are sort of the face and mouthpiece of the 3 types of therapism that you'll hear. And so Phil Stutz doesn't really have like anything unique of his own. He's just a regular psychiatrist, and he talks about how he gives people tools. And a lot of the stuff that he talks about is just like watered down stuff that you would hear, like for instance, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? It's like pyramid of like certain needs that you have, and then you have like your physical needs and sort of emotional needs, and then like this needs of like meaning or purpose. It's a little watered down, but Phil Stutz waters it down by saying it's like you got your body, you got people, and then you got yourself. These are the sort of needs that you're always going to be preoccupied with. And he talks about something that's like, what makes you want to strive for this is this thing I call life force, right? Just some of this mysterious thing. It's just like, what are you talking about, bro? Anyhow, he then will say that like we feel unsatisfied with ourselves because of the shadow, right? A Jungian thing. He calls it the X that you don't want to understand or recognize because of peer pressure, because of just like social norms and stuff. And so this is when we start to get into what Stutz's tools are. He gives visualization tools. Pretty much it's stuff that you will see in any type of DBT or CBT course, meditative visualizations. And so an example is the X, in which we try to list the sort of words that we put upon ourselves that we feel self-conscious of, like I'm lazy, I'm a piece of shit or whatever, and just visualize that and accept it and learn to integrate it over time. And then we get into another point in which like, oh, you feel like people just don't understand you and you're caught in this maze, right? And you just like have a sort of narrow perception, especially when people irritate you. Well, think about being in a field of love and just visualize that and project it upon that other person that may be upsetting you. It's like right then and there, it's just like obfuscating anything. Like, yeah, maybe somebody did piss you off, but it doesn't mean that's like like indicative of any pathological undermining, right? It's just like using everyday things, just being like, okay, I got angry at my boss, or I got angry at my neighbor, let me like visualize them and give them a sort of like field of love. But like, here's where it just gets like sort of political without him realizing it. So it's like, some working class person that's just like overworked, alienated, and just like, making ends meet, and they have a corrupt boss, corrupt capitalist, or like a shitty landlord that's going to kick them out because they can't afford rent. Are they going to like just think about giving them a field of love and stuff like that? It's like, no. Some of the times it's like, as Michael Downs of the Dangerous Maybe says, I'd feel a lot better if I got paid better and I didn't have to live under wage labor at the same time.
Right.
And
that, so, I think in our original Stutz conversation, I think I actually pulled up a quote from his text where he actually is talking about somebody working under a boss or a manager who's being a jerk, right? And so he actually uses this, like you just said, this is a way of problematizing Stutz, and it's like actually. It's actually inherent to it. He actually has it throughout his work, is kind of, if you've got a problem with your boss, then you just need to send them the love field,
Right. And this is something that you'll see in like, any form of modern therapy. It's like, oh, you're having trouble with work, you're not feeling unsatisfied, like you're feeling unsatisfied, or like you're tired of your boss, you need to like work on that cognitive distortion, because it's like, oh, as soon as you see him in the morning, you're already angry and you're just already visualizing how you're going to punch him or something like that. Like, maybe you need to not do what's called fortune telling, which is a form of cognitive distortion in which you're already predicting what's going to happen. And then you're just in black and white thinking. Maybe you got to realize that maybe they had a bad day as well, that they're just human, just like you, and realize the good things about them, like just kind of relaying everything back to you and making yourself the responsible person to be the cop of your own distortions or thinking.
So that's the first one. That's Stutz. Second one.
Stutz. Then we got Jordan Peterson, and Jordan Peterson, right? Like, he's an interesting figure because he is a psychologist, and he's also the self-help guru. And he's interesting because like he doesn't follow this narrative of like happiness, right? But he actually thinks that we don't want happiness, and he points this out in his debate with Slavoj and just in a lot of his lectures and even in his book. But he obfuscates happiness for personal meaning, right? His sort of watered down existentialism is very influenced by whatever interpretation he has of Heidegger, Nietzsche, Kierkegaard, and then Dostoevsky is a big one. And that like to wish for happiness, it's pretty much a failed goal because we undermine our own happiness, right? It sounds very psychoanalytical, and he'll always talk about how if you look at like socialist countries, socialism wants happiness for everybody, but look at how they fail, and just any sort of like political category that wants happiness as its main goal is just down to fail, which is based on agreeableness and all this stuff. But what he has in mind with personal meaning is these rules for life, the 12 rules, which are just so like very mundane, typical dad stuff, where it's just like, one of the rules is like standing up straight, and like literally standing up straight, keep your back erect, stuff like what is he? I think he has to like pet a cat or something, like, or pet an animal. Think about what you want to be in the future. Like, imagine like being friends with yourself. Like all these sorts of like proverbial statements that just are meant to say like, pick, for lack of a better term, pick yourself up by your bootstraps.
Right.
And the main thing that he always talks about is ordering the world. Before ordering the world, like, why don't you order up yourself first? Like, clean your room, get yourself and organized before you think about changing the world. As if like it's this thing that Slavoj says. It's like, even though the sort of Coca-Cola companies, plastic companies are creating that sort of economic crisis, it's still imperative that you order and organize all your Pepsi cans from the Coca-Cola bottles to make things easier for us so that we could fight for an ecological, harmony. And so there's the same logic. It's like, yeah, the world's cruel and everything, but you think you're going to fight the cruel world, the way you are? Like, you want to order yourself first before you could think about ordering the world. Where Slavoj is like, isn't the fact that we got to order our room indicative of the fact that we live in a fucked up world that's creating a disorganized room? And so pretty much I just tie on to that, because like, besides the fact that Jordan Peterson is pretty much advocating this hyper individualism that focuses on like self-discipline and these rules, he likes to say that, we think that, we're these good people, which is also, funny. He's like, he gives us this like thought experiment of like, oh, I always tell my patients, what would happen if you lived in World War II Germany and you were a guard in Auschwitz? And they'd be like, well, I'd fight them all off and I'd free all the prisoners. And he's like, no, you wouldn't. He's like, you would enjoy it and you would love to torture all of them. So his thought experiment is to think of yourself as a Auschwitz prison guard and just, pretty much Nazi, and just think about all the cool things that you would do. And then once you do that, that means you encounter the shadow, and then you could change yourself. So it's just like so weird. I know I'm kind of going off into like something that, like, yeah, you talk about it in the essay, but like I'm giving a more like kind of dialed down, less intellectualized version of it. But it's just kind of funny to like think about, like, this is the type of person that gets credited as like as a public intellectual, and also like somebody who's supposed to be a certified clinician. But besides his rules, he's dubious. Like, what is your therapy? Like, besides teaching people in the White House myths, it's like, what is your therapy and your, clinical project entitle, if not just telling people stuff that their dad could tell them,
Right. Well, I have this thing I'm going to do, I guess, where I always defend these people a little bit, because even if you just have an audience of a few thousand people, man, if they're really scrutinizing you and really engaged with you, you discover you've got a lot of people who are struggling, who have kind of put you up on a pedestal, and I'm saying even if it's just a few thousand. Now, if you add millions to okay, now you've got people who want to kill you, who want to kill your family, who harass you. That's instantly, that comes with the territory. If you have any real dynamism in your personality, then that brings even more hate. And then if you also if you have any opinions that stray from what you're really supposed to be talking about, then it's even worse. So that's kind of the case with all celebrities. But then in his position, it's even worse because he does have that clinical background. And so a lot of people, they don't just put him on this sort of big daddy symbolic, they don't just put him in that place. They also superload it with, well, he also knows psychology, he's a clinician, he's able to help. Even if he didn't have that, I think most people who have a heart and any kind of a conscience, who have a big following and realize, fuck, people are fucked up today. Everyone's struggling. And wow, I've got a lot of people who are barely holding it together in my audience. And they ask me every day what they should do. I think almost anybody who has that kind of audience and a shred of, integrity or conscience is going to feel like, fuck, I should probably do something to be a good example, and I should probably say some things that they'll really take to heart. And so it's like, yeah, dads give advice, but most people don't listen to their dads. And then if they seek you out as the daddy figure, then I don't know. I don't really blame people for giving advice and kind of going down the self-helpy rabbit trail. And I think that it's a sort of numbers game because there's so many people. So it's like everyone's going to be a small creator, but if you decided to make the leap and go big because you see some opportunity and so you go for it, well, you're opening yourself up for this position, and then because everyone's so messed up, feeling the weight of that responsibility, you're gonna cater to it, right?
I agree 100%. And I like to one of the things that, I mean, you talked to Tut, I remember, in the 2-day marathon, and his book, Politics of the Family, he talks about Lash and how there's the decline of the paternal metaphor. Wait, that's a Lacanian thing, paternal metaphor, but there's the decline of the father figure. So like, it's understandable to see, especially when, in late stage capitalism, the dissolution of the family's having its own contradictions, that people dislike their father or the father figure, but they try to effectively cope with reality by looking for another paternal metaphor. And we could see how Peterson kind of acts as that symbolic substitute in a world where the paternal metaphor is declining.
Yeah. Perfect. And so then your third person, maybe we're ready to move on to Gabor Maté. And so how would you would you agree that it's basically Jordan Peterson is like this sort of masculinist, sort of conservative version of this, and the Gabor Maté is sort of I don't want to say less masculine. He's just a different version of masculine, but it's definitely something that traditional masculinity would see as a more effeminate approach. And so that would be, he's the more liberal side though. So it's like conservative, liberal. And Stutz is kind of vaguely in the center between these two. Is that right?
Yeah. And then the funny thing is that I would actually label Maté as a sort of liberalization of the paternal metaphor, or just like of any type of the phallus, of somebody who has the phallus. And it's funny because Gabor Maté, a while back, in an interview, considers himself a leftist intellectual, a Marxist, but the way that he is actually, promoting himself is very mainstream, sort of PMC, to use your term, PMC. He's very PMC, very liberalized. And I like to describe from an example, two examples that both Maté and Peterson have. So Peterson believes that kids, for them to be healthy adults, they have to be thrown into sports and rough and tumble play, because, for lack of a better term, boys who aren't, adverse in rough and tumble play and roughhousing end up becoming agreeable people, or simps, for lack of a better term. They become the people that you don't want to be around, the most dangerous individuals ever. Whereas Maté says it's like, no, kids need a space for recognition, creativity, love, and nurturing. They need to be belonging. They have to feel belonged by, their caregiver. And when they don't have healthy role models that give them that nurturing and warmth, then they suffer, they develop trauma, and they try to reorganize that through a sense of feeling of warmth and love and belonging through various modalities of different, groups that, mistreat them or fall into substance abuse to kind of, compensate for that lack of belonging. So that's the difference between Maté and Peterson, in my opinion. But, just to kind of simplify it, it is a liberalized version of Peterson, to compare the two. They're both very super egoic. One's demanding, you should, thou shalt not, which is, I would encourage you to do this. It's better for your well-being type thing, enjoy it.
Right. One is more one is more disciplinary capitalism. The other one is more controlled capitalism.
Yeah. You decide the space in which you want to confine yourself to, And so I already brushed up on Maté earlier, but just kind of reiterated, Maté again was, he's a Canadian. Well, he lives in Canada, but he's I think he's Hungarian, but he's a physician who did a lot of work in the field of addiction. And then he wrote many books. One of them is The Field of Hungry, or The Realm of Hungry Ghosts, in which he really popularizes his notion of addiction. Of, like I said earlier, not why the substance, but why the pain. But,
right.
My critique of him is because Maté is actually somebody who is in, the therapy discourse compared to someone like Peterson, although I consider himself like into therapism, he advocates self-help. Whereas someone like Maté, he's tackling in on like a lot of the scientific research on addiction, brain chemicals, serotonin. And he talks about like, that most of the patients he's dealing with are suffering with addiction because of a lack of belonging in their life. They were, alienated by their family. They suffered from lack of recognition and love, and this emphasis of a child being able to express their authenticity, which he's a big proponent of. And he's a big proponent of self-regulating. So one of the things he advocates for is, self-regulating and authenticity, because it's a part of our physiological development. And he always reduces those things down to, physiological development, as if we could find those categories of authenticity and self-regulating in a sort of biological framework. That puts into question a sort of philosophical questioning. Where are those located in a biological framework?
So he locates our need for autonomy and authenticity in a
in a sort of physiological makeup. Talking about like attachment theory and stuff like that. He's like very vaguely, talking about attachment theory, but sort of like how we develop from our relation to our mother or a caregiver, and the lack of that creates like trauma. And he uses the term like not belonging. And so later on, like Maté, like his latest book, The Myth of Normal, it's like he doubles down. He's like saying like we live in a society that's indifferent, that doesn't care about our needs for authenticity, that shames us for being unique and creative. And so pretty much we need to be authentic. We need to be self-regulating, because we live in a society that promotes stagnation and things that turn into addiction. And addiction takes in any form, not just, I know I mentioned substance like alcohol or drugs, but he locates addiction in like, excess shopping, constant social media, sex, porn, adrenaline activities. It's like, okay, then you're talking about everything that could be exchanged for in capitalism. And so it's like we live in a society for him, but it's like, well, what is the society rooted in? And he thinks of it as indifferent and not allowing us to be creative. But I would say the opposite. It's like the injunction of capitalism wants us to do that. Anything that it could create exchange value from and commodify, that it wants us to enjoy. It doesn't want us to be stagnant. That's old capitalism.
Yeah, 100%. And that both of these versions of capitalism live at the same time, and that someone gets rich every time you go from one side to the other. For every time you try to switch your life up from one of these ways to the other way, someone stands to profit, but it ain't you.
Yeah. Right. And there's always this valorization of like, oh, I struggled from addiction, but look where I'm at now. I grew up rough. Like I had a father that didn't love me, or just like, I grew up from nothing. And it's like, you're like every other person. The only thing is you're addicted. You just got addicted. Right. That's the thing. It's not to discredit people with addiction problems. It's the fact it's that the way that we mystify it and then create a success and hero story. It's like now they're able to be normal and live an authentic life they should have lived. Where it's like, well, we have people that are struggling with that and don't have a story, right? We just got like, people that are dealing with, alienation and their labor being taken away from, or their surplus value, etc. And that all they look forward to is, like I said, going home and cracking open a cold one and just watching the game because they got to repeat the thing, over and over again. And nobody accounts for that, because it's like, it's the vanishing mediator. Capital is the vanishing mediator. Class struggle is that.
Right.
And all these sort of, structural stultifications, of our subjectivity, are obfuscated by just like, oh, you need to take care of yourself. Like the fact that it has a systemic origin, the vanishing meteor being class antagonism of, the working class, the PMC, the ruling class, etc. All that goes, out of harm's way. And we just need to locate on recentering ourselves and being our best versions in these discourses. that tell us to enjoy in some certain way or find meaning, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Here are the tools. Be authentic.
Yeah, the real problem is that you just haven't learned how to tell your story, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's that is the therapism, ego psychology, and all of these other things related to it, like object relations and attachment theory and everything that you've been touching on, as well as behaviorism and CBT. All of this ultimately comes down to ways of coping within a class society where nobody has time, energy, and we're supposed to make ourselves ready to be exploited at any given moment. Yeah. And you're not doing a good job making yourself exploitable. Well, then we're going to have to diagnose you so we can figure out how to get you back to that. Right?
Yeah. And like how Amazon and other companies have meditation chambers, right? But it's like,
Zen
booths. I know you have experiences of that. It's like, another way of like, recalibrating yourself. But like that takes up all your breaks, so you don't even have time to eat. So it's like, what do I do? Do I meditate to keep my sanity, or do I fucking eat something so I don't die of starvation just to go back to doing the same thing for the next 4 hours? Yeah,
dude, I was working these 12-hour shifts last year and at Amazon, and they're always repeating that you can always go and do the meditation, or you can always go to the health center if you need to go to the health center. And then when I finally actually took advantage of it, I found out, no, they actually they deduct that off of your break time for your food. And then I was like, well, which one is it? Like, I have to choose between eating and going down to the health center to get my sore elbow looked at? Great. Yeah. Well, guess what? I'm going to eat. Sorry, I'm going to eat. They're like, well, you can stay after. Yeah, okay, staying after. What would that mean? So my 12-hour shift becomes a 12-hour and 45-minute shift, and then of course I only get 6 hours of sleep before I have to come right back for my next 12-hour shift. Fuck.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
so good.
But the Zen booths, man, they call them Amazen. Like they're that
and it's funny, the military is starting to do something like that. I know in San Diego they had like a little religious center. It was like a little booth where you could meditate, or if you're a Muslim you could pray. But that thing was always locked though. I was just like, and the hours would be like, hours are from like this time to this time. And then when I would go there, I was just like, bro, this shit is always locked. But now they do this thing where they talk about like mental health clinics where you get like your corpsman of the base that will come on and talk about the importance of sleep hygiene and knowing your circadian rhythm. It's like, that's all fine and dandy, but do you expect my captain to really give a hell about that shit? Like, hell no. Like, I can learn about this, like, the importance of like not, dipping or drinking energy drinks or getting the right amount of sleep, not eating at this hour or whatever. But it's like, I'm not going to be able to tell my chain of command that when I have to stand watch from like, midnight to 7 a.m. You think they're going to care? They're like, no, go stand your post.
Is it? Jeez, and you're doing that right now still, huh?
I'm on leave right now, but yeah,
you're on
but
leave.
It's just so funny. It's so funny that they do that to implement it and be like, well, we got to take care of our sailors because we're tired of people, we can't handle the fact that people are either getting out or committing suicide, so it's like, we got to implement these ways to develop mental health as if like the onus is on us and not the structure itself.
Right. If they could get you guys to fix it at the individual level, or if they can also figure out a way of changing it so that from the inside of this system, you're not experiencing the feelings that make you want to off yourself. It doesn't change the objective realities of what that system is doing to other people and the planet, right? And so, but of course, if they could get you all to keep doing exactly what you need to do in order for it to all function, but you all feel happy and you stay kind of willfully ignorant of the consequences of your actions, they'd go for it, right? So if it was like Ender's Game or something, if they could get everybody to think they're just playing video games, then they would, right?
Right. No, that's exactly right. Yeah.
But they don't want to change a damn thing.
There's also the libidinal enjoyment of being in the military, where like some people will be like, I freaking hate this shit, I can't wait to do my 4 years and then get out. And then once they make rank, they may like sort of enjoy it, and they're just like, yeah, like I feel like a new person. And They enjoy all the sort of incentives that come with that, and the ability just to tell people lower than them what to do and yell at them and curse at them, because they get off from it. It's like, oh, I'm getting shitted on, now I'm going to shit on you. And so it's just like the never ending cycle.
Cool, man. Well, I think that we've basically done it all, but I want to give you a couple minutes here to make a sort of closing statement before we open it up to a sort of Q&A. We'll take a couple questions, hopefully, from the folks who are here in the Zoom call right now. And just kind of maybe tie it all together somehow.
Yeah, so pretty much what like I said, my 2 points of what my goal were for this essay was, one, to show that therapism and all forms of therapy that fall under that CBT, like any form of behaviorism, CBT, DBT, these psychotherapies. I even mentioned the essay EDMR, which is like a form of like eye rapid movement type thing that like is supposed to like identify trauma. These are all forms of therapy that like, obfuscate the sort of subjectivity that is at stake, which is in relation to capital and political economy, libidinal economy, stuff that psychoanalysis and with the help of Žižek and many others have pointed out, and that it in psychoanalysis, suffices as an excellent critique, and it's a growing modality for social and political critique, and also to show that psychoanalysis could be a new possibility for not only further critique but also for a modality that doesn't obfuscate our desires, our unconscious, for something purely personal, and realize that we are affected, we are oppressed by capital class antagonism and the imperial core. Like, this is what is going on in Latin America. Like, most of the people in Latin America that are analysts are also Marxists or anarchists or some sort. And so like, not only are they helping people, and like Freud developed something called the free clinic, and it's being slowly integrated as a thing to help the working class. So we got that, going on. And just the fact that like it's always changing, because we got new ways of understanding, like, how trauma works, but just like our desire, our drive, and the way, that we sort of operate in the world, or worldhood, to be Heideggerian about it. Like, it brings into light new things that were once closed, that are being disclosed now. And that's because, again, to evoke Žižek, his notion of Donald Rumsfeld's levels of knowledge. So Donald Rumsfeld was like somebody who worked with NATO. I forget what he was. I think he was like the weapons director. I don't know, something like that. Somebody could put it in the comments. But yeah, like during the time of like Iraq, like Donald Rumsfeld was talking about weapons of mass destruction and knowledge. And so Žižek talks about Donald Rumsfeld's methods of knowing. We have what are called your known knowns. We know what we know. We have our known unknowns. We know that we don't know certain things. Mm-hmm. And then we have our unknown unknowns. We're unknown to the things that are unknown to us. And then you have your unknown knowns. This is something that Žižek spins off of by saying that psychoanalysis runs into the field of the unknown knowns. We are unknown to the things that we do know, and that is on the level of the unconscious. And so psychoanalysis is able to identify this on the level of language and speech, of what we know but are unknown of, or are unknown to us at the moment.
Right. The unknown knowns. The shit you know that you don't know you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you don't know, now you know.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you so much for this. And now I just kind of want to invite Christopher, Philip, and Nance to ask any questions or share any things that they were thinking about. I could see Christopher and Nance were both thinking about some of the stuff you're talking about in terms of military service, that's for sure. But I don't know. Yeah, just, hey guys, go ahead and open it up here. No need to raise your hands, just go for it.
Yeah, just go for it.
Sorry, I was muted. I was gonna say if you had to pick one or the other, like Maté or Peterson, like to send like your child to therapy, like if you had to, who would you pick?
I'd
Or
probably
would you
pick.
just be like, don't just fuck it, raw
I'd just
dog
say
it?
fuck it. To be
Yeah,
honest, like
okay.
with my like level of knowledge, I'd rather just like be pedagogical.
Yeah,
But like if I was forced to, like I'd probably pick Mate.
yeah. No, that's what I was gonna say
Yeah.
too. Because like the VA is big on like CBT, as I'm
Oh
sure
yeah,
like
yeah.
you guys would
But
know.
and I don't know exactly what Mate is never really like disclose what he actually does, like as far as forms of therapy. But you know, he still fits in the sort of discourse of just therapism, as in just like mental hygiene, mental health,
Mhm.
taking care of yourself, being your unique self, authenticity, self-regulating, which is a key thing for him. And this also notion of healing, you know, which is a big thing, which I find very dubious at times. You
Yeah,
know,
that's the big thing I feel like now on Instagram and other places. It's like ways
yeah,
to optimize yourself or like adjust to the system.
yeah. And it's funny because you see a lot of like therapists in these different modalities that I've seen like on not YouTube, that was a Freudian slip, on IG, that promotes like they promote their like work, and they make like little like slideshow posts about like tips to stay healthy or tips when you have anxiety. And you know, they'll like post some like anti-capitalist stuff, but like the only way to combat against capitalism and the way that it makes us stressed or depressed is by being healthy, taking care of yourself, doing healthy habits, phoning a friend, like just like average things that most of us already try to do but have a hard time doing. So you just got to reinforce it more, like, you
And
know.
then you feel guilty because you can't do that and it makes you
Yeah,
like more depressed and more
yeah,
anxious.
yeah.
100%.
I want to just say, so let's just, does the answer to whether you would send that kid to Peterson or Mate change if the child is, let's say there's two kids that you might have. One is the super simp softy kid who already is just like really likes to make space, quiet places, and already has like a sort of anxiety that he's always reacting against. Or say you've got some little girl who's like super aggro
Yeah.
and tough and likes to scrap. Okay, now you've got these two kids. Which ones do you send them to?
So, trick answer, I'll send them to both and see which one they attach to if I had
There
to
you
pick,
go.
because we got to remember transference is a big thing.
Yeah.
So who knows what they have a transferential relationship with? Maybe the sort of rough and tumble female actually, instead of picking Peterson, actually wants a Mate because they're like acting like that because of the rough and tumble father, which that's probably not going to be me. You know, as much as I fit the criteria of like a bro, because I'm always lifting, I'm always like wrestling and stuff like that. I'm like the most like, you know, compassionate person ever. I can't even like, even being a leader in the military, it's hard for me to take myself seriously. You know, so I don't even think like I could be like that.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. But no, like that's, yeah, I would send them to both and then see like, you know, who they have a transferential relation towards.
Right.
And who knows, it would probably make like Peterson really like step out of his comfort zone and be like, oh, I have to think differently. That's funny.
And my sponsor made me read his book when I like first got sober, the 12 rules. I didn't finish it, but he was like, he seems more Jungian, or was like when he
Yeah,
describes his practice at least. So I
yeah,
think
he
some of the
talks
book is
about
just
ordering chaos. Yeah, keep going. Yeah,
mm,
but he talks about like ordering chaos a lot, which is a Jungian
yeah,
thing. Individuation.
yeah,
You know?
and dreams and stuff. So I feel like it also depends on just like if your kid is like more imaginative or like
Yeah.
sensitive versus like need structure.
Right.
Again, I think it just boils down to
I mean, honestly though, like it, if there was no like Lacanian, but like I felt like it was insistent on like sending my kids to therapy, I would send them to like a object relationist. They work with a lot of kids. I'd rather do like a watered down form of psychoanalysis than any cognitive behavioral therapy.
No, definitely.
Yeah.
And every cognitive behavioral therapist I had like would try to diagnose me within like 30 minutes.
Bro, they're so corny. They're the corniest people ever. Like, they can't think out beside their own paradigm of cognitive behavioral therapy, or just like when they recommend a book to read, it's always a self-help pop psychology. Like it's so cliche.
My problems list on the VA, like on the report or whatever, like literally is just like patient needs 30 minutes of CBT a week for 6 months, and then like he'll be good to fucking go work at Amazon for 12 hours.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
I don't know about that.
Christopher, what did I say that had you say that's because you weren't bullied in high school in the comments?
Oh, section? Not you. When Andrew was saying he's not like an asshole, like as a leader in the military. Like most people in the military who are like, you got to respect my authority, were like bullied in like high school. They're like,
I wasn't
me as petty officer or whatever.
Yeah,
like, bro, calm the fuck down.
I wasn't bullied in high school, but I went through like hell year every year for wrestling. Like every day was hell week,
Yeah. No, I was just saying people in the military sometimes. Like,
it's crazy.
Lives, or like the chiefs who like don't want to see their wives and keep everybody like working until like 1800, 6 o'clock.
Oh my God, bro, I hate that. That's the worst.
Oh, that's a whole thing, huh?
That's a thing. Yeah.
It's like I want to make everybody else stay here with me, so I don't have to go home to my wife.
Yeah, she's gonna verbally abuse me because I don't do shit around the house.
Let me yell at a kid because a 30-year-old's an E4 and I don't like his shave.
Oh my God! One of these days we should just do like a ex-military or vet like grievance session. Get the three of you together, and we'll just let you all just like talk about all the fucking bullshit. That would be pretty fun.
No, it was funny. The very first young Žižekian conversation we had with Todd, remember when he was like, why do you want to be an analyst? Don't you want to blow shit up in the military, Andrew? Like Top Gun? And I want to take Todd to a military base so he could see all the naval equipment and stuff like that to see what he would say.
That movie made me want to re-enlist.
Was it Theory Underground Special? We take Todd to a military base.
He's doing a FOD walk down the entire thing.
FOD walk down. He's got to wear coveralls and everything.
We were saying we should change because like the CB rates have pictures of like the valve and the equipment, and we're like, it should be a shovel or a broom. It's the only thing we use.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
90% of the time.
Oh, you're kissing the top of your microphone. Interesting. Oh, no, now it's...
Oh.
Chaos frequently. Well, it's legal in some places. No, I'm not gonna change that. That's public. That's on YouTube.
Yeah, that's on YouTube.
You'll be out of the military by the time anyone tries to cancel you for it. Yeah.
It's all conjecture too. Be like, you gotta.
I'm smoking tobacco.
Me now. Yeah.
You just say,
I'm smoking tobacco out of this piece. What are you talking about?
You just got to say what Alex Jones said. I'm an actor. I'm an entertainer. It was just an act, or say what Bill Clinton said, which is, I didn't inhale,
Yeah, I didn't inhale. I did not inhale any tetrahydrocannabinol from that pipe.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman. All right. Well, I want to let everybody say their final thoughts, and we'll close this out on the public side, and then we'll go have fun on the private side. So, any closing thoughts here from Christopher or Nance before we turn it back to Andrew?
Good. Thank you.
Yeah. I was definitely excited to do this. I mean, I don't really have anything else closing. I would just say that my emphasis in this essay is literally Lacanian Freudian psychoanalysis. So it's like, don't listen to anything that really I say as the truth. Go read Lacan, go read Freud, because as Žižek says, Lacan is the truth. And that's the truth. Lacan is the truth. Read seminars 1 and 2, because I think that is the perfect critique for therapism.
Thank you. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
And now a quick message from our sponsors. Just kidding. This will be neither quick nor from any corporate or state sponsorship.
What's up, everybody? Thank you so much for watching all the way through. The fact that you made it to the end means you get a gold star. Yeah. What I'm going to do with this little bit of time remaining at the end is give you the quick rundown on everything. I'm kind of assuming an audience of people who are not reading all the emails that I send out, who are not registered with Theory Underground, who are not taking ongoing courses at Theory Underground. And so you might be someone who's come to the channel for the first time, in which case you probably just think that this is a YouTube, in which case, well, of course, you're partially correct, but mostly wrong. Because if you look right here, what I have is a course site. It is its own platform on theory-underground.com. But it's not just courses. These courses are gateways to a bigger and more important conversation that is just getting started. And really, after this next month that I'm taking off to get married and to go on a honeymoon, once I get back, the conversation and the events really kick into gear. There's going to be a national tour that will have a sort of international component, not just because it's online, but also because we will be going into Canada, Mexico, as well as potentially Europe. So stay tuned. I mean, we've been invited to Hong Kong. There's talk about going to Thailand. But it's kind of dependent on the people who reach out to us and talk to us, because this is all word of mouth and DIY. I'm not doing marketing. I'm not really trying to pursue new clicks through the algorithm outside of basic cooperation kinds of projects that I do with people like Todd McGowan, Chris Catrone, Nina Power, Daniel Tutt, etc. The point of doing what I'm doing with all of them is to say, yes, this is a part of a bigger conversation. This is beside everything going on with the media left and TheoryTube and Theorygram and all of those other things that are happening in the theory scene. But what I hope to establish through Theory Underground is a more rigorous and hybrid, sustained kind of dialogue with the people who are really serious about the life of the mind. And so, that means not just watching videos here and there and then telling other people, oh, I've got opinions and then these videos say something about me, but instead drilling down into fundamental concepts, questions, problems, tracing out the contours and inherent constitutive contradictions of the fields that we are in. And so what I hope to see come out of the theory scene is an intellectual milieu. But this can't just happen overnight. It happens over time. And these courses are just to be a part of that unfolding. Most of these have already happened. So, Mikey teaches Žižek's For They Know Not What They Do. While he's teaching that course, I was simultaneously demonstrating how to be an active, critical, engaged student, right? And I did this exact same thing with the What is Sex course, where really it was Cadell Last from Philosophy Portal who was heading up everything, but it was me who was kind of modeling that student. But I also have co-instructed some courses here, like the Professional Managerial Class Consciousness and Ideology course that I co-instructed with Elton L.K. of the Working Class Intelligentsia and the Dead Parrots Philosophical Society. Elton L.K., great guy, love him. But, he's just one of these people who are in my organic intellectual milieu sort of network. And then the people that have come in through the virtual have an opportunity to ground out into that organic network by meeting up with us on tour. A couple of other people in that organic network who are here from the very beginning, and I've done stuff with them with a lot of other previous projects, was Brian Weeks and Ann Snellgrove, who are co-instructors for the Idea of the University course right here, which was the first course launched at Theory Underground. But if you want to meet some of us, if you want to actually ground out in the organic network, if you want to actually break through through the walls that kind of come with these media form and actually get the vibe, you'll want to meet us in real life, in person. And we are prioritizing the people who are reaching out to us and filling out the form for the Theory Underground US Tour 2023. And so if you go to the tab on the website, on the header called events, you go to the drop down for US Tour 2023, then you can fill out this form here, and then there's a high likelihood that we'll try to do one of our events in person wherever you are at. And so we're trying to add only real people who are serious about meeting in real life, because if you prefer to stay in the role of a consumer, of someone who just kind of subscribes to content and clicks on it whenever you're just kind of distracted from whatever you're doing, that's totally fine. But if you're actually looking to get to, like, I don't know, another level of discourse where it's not just we're talking at each other, but instead we are in a field and we actually have reference in that field that go beyond just idle chatter, then you'll want to get involved with this for sure. So that's the main thing. I wanted to tell you that once I come back from the honeymoon and the time away for the wedding, the events are really going to kick off. The tour is going to be what I'm focusing most of my energy on. But at the same time that the tour launches, so too will 2 books be published from Theory Underground. One is my book, Timenergy, and the other book is Underground Theory. There will be big names such as Slavoj Žižek, Norman Finkelstein, Todd McGowan, Alenka Zupancic, as well as Nina Power, Daniel Tutt, Chris Catrone, and a lot of nobodies like me. Just people who have either dropped out of the university system or never even enrolled, who are nonetheless passionate about studying theory as a way of life. That's what this book is. It's 31 contributors towards underground theory, as well as critical media theory, ideology critique, the left and its critique, and there's even some essays in there on historical interpretation and the history of philosophy. So these 2 books, the Underground Theory book as well as my Timenergy book, will be published and available September 1st. And that's basically when we kick off the tour. So if you want us to come to a city near you and talk about these books or do any kind of an event, then reach out, fill out the form. And as far as Timenergy goes, you can see right here, I've actually got the Timenergy course is now listed. This course is going to begin in September. So if you've been interested in the concept of Timenergy, if you're interested in a deep dive through the history of philosophy, drawing from philosophers as ancient as Aristotle through to more modern metaphysicians of time like Bergson or Kant, then this is definitely for you. But if you're even more interested in abstract time and domination through someone like Moïse Pistone, a sort of post-Marxist, or actually Marx, Bourdieu, Foucault, we could talk about disciplinary time, existential time. We're going to bring in Adorno. We're going to bring in Nietzsche, Arendt. This course is going to be going through the history of philosophy, mostly focusing on time, but also leisure and freedom as fundamental concepts, and developing Timenergy as a sort of eminent critique of many of these philosophers and many of these theorists, and of pretty much the entire political scene as it currently exists. And so this will not be a super intensive course. You're not going to be assigned entire books to read. There will just be a monthly lecture, sort of seminar lecture, as well as a monthly check-in kind of discussion group, right? And that discussion group is one that's going to happen very much like the critical media theory reflection cohort discussion group that's currently also ongoing. So if you are not already signed up with the critical media theory research cohort, then you'll definitely want to get signed up with this Timenergy research cohort, because it's going to be arguably as good or better than the critical media theory one. But both of these courses are not too intensive. Both are ongoing, and it's never too late to join the critical media theory one either, right? We've already gotten a bunch of signups 2 months after the fact, because this isn't something that will just end in 6 months. We're going to repeat it. And for the people who join late, they actually get to be in the next one as well. So get involved with the Timenergy course and the critical media theory course. Same thing goes with the Being in Time course. We're reading all the way through Martin Heidegger's Being in Time as one of the most profound, difficult, and important deconstructions and critiques of everything that we take to heart, that we presuppose, just taking for granted as natural, as subjects of modernity. This is what we do. And Heidegger is one of the greatest enemies of modernity, as is obviously Friedrich Nietzsche. And so both of them are the kinds of frenemies of any serious thinker who's trying to interrogate their own most closely held presuppositions, right? And so if you've ever thought about taking on a challenge like reading Being in Time all the way through, then it's not too late. You can actually still enroll in this course, and you can do the reading on your own for Division 1 over this next month. And then once you're caught up and you've gone through the lectures for Division 1, Division 2 will actually begin once I get back in mid-August. Okay? So there's a tour, there's books, there's courses. What more could I possibly add? There's an app. And that's been something that has taken a lot of my energy and effort away from Theory Underground as a website. It's because I've been mostly problem solving the app for the last few months. But what I am currently showing up on the screen here are tickets. Every time there's an error with the website or my app, I have to open a support ticket with someone who's responsible down the line for figuring out how to problem solve the bugs. And so I've opened 1 million tickets. As you can see on the screen, these are tickets that I opened between basically mid-July and the beginning of May. But then I can go back, and I'm just showing you on the screen all of these different tickets, almost as a way of showing off that I've been doing constant troubleshooting in the background because I'm on the fly learning how to operate and run not just like the sort of ins and outs of a course-based or course-gated social media site, but more importantly, that I'm building the actual platform and that I'm doing it where I have to troubleshoot everything with programmers, a team of programmers. And it's all good preparation for what I hope will happen as Theory Underground gets a little bit more steam over the course of the next year. Eventually, I'll have a dedicated team of programmers, not people who are like these people, divided between 1 million different tickets that they are problem solving, but instead having my own dedicated team. Anyway, so the app. Right now, all I'm showing you is that there's a lot of support tickets opened, but we've actually reached a point now where I think that the app is about to go out. And if you're curious about that, just know that it's going to have like the capabilities for you to be able to message people who are on Theory Underground, for you to be able to partake in the forums and social groups, including the multilingualism, language learning clubs, as well as the film club. But more importantly, it will be a way to subscribe on a monthly basis so that you have access to everything going on at Theory Underground. Not just all the courses, not just all the conversations, but also all of these B-side specials that we've been doing. These are not listed on the regular website. They're not listed on the YouTube channel. They're specifically reserved for people who are subscribers, who are really plugged into the kind of ongoing conversation. And so if you're curious about that ongoing conversation, just know that there are Theory Underground hub events. That's kind of what we're calling them for right now. But basically the hub events are like this one coming up here. Like right here, as you can see, there was a hub event on July 11th. There's another hub event coming up on July 18th. And as you can see, there's an office hours event that happens during the hub event. But more importantly, there's a panel of presentations on hardcore theory, a panel of presentations on hip hop, as well as a special segment on critical media theory reflections, where even if you're not in that course, you still get to kind of partake in one of the things that's going on with that course. And And these kind of hub events where it's like one Zoom call for the whole event, it's going to be like 6 or 7 hours long with different segments on different things, are really just an opportunity for people who are fellow travelers to drop in, to say hello, to kind of get the vibe, to see what's going on. And most importantly, for people who are in ongoing courses or in past courses, who have questions about the text, have questions about the lectures, who have reading reflections that they've done on that week's reading, who want to talk about it, to be able to come to the office hours, because every hub event will always have an office hour segment where basically the students in currently ongoing or past courses have priority, meaning that if you take this professional managerial class consciousness and ideology course, or the idea of the university course, or this, for they know not what they know, for they know not what they do course, any of these past courses that you take, you've got weekly questions as you go through it. You'll always have someone to come talk to during the office hour events that are happening at the Theory Underground Hub on a weekly basis. So I just really want to stress that, because otherwise you might feel like, oh, I'm left behind. These courses are already in the past. They're already over. There's nothing I can do. I just have to binge it on my own and I'd be all on my own. No. Not only is there a live ongoing office hours kind of event where you can come and discuss what you're doing, but more importantly, there's also the forums. And so a lot of the video conversations we have related to these specific courses, those videos get uploaded into the forums on those specific topics, and then you're looped in. And the people who have taken those courses in the past, they're reminded about the content of those courses, and maybe they want to go back over some of the stuff, and it kind of keeps the discourse centered around the subject matter, instead of just all of us talking, acting like, oh, well, we know what we're talking about. We know without even having gone through the same readings together. We just know that we all kind of know. We get it. No, this is what Heidegger calls idle chatter. This kind of communication that tends to happen online is symptomatic of what happens when all of the connections that we form are in these virtual networks that don't ever ground out in real life discourse. There's something about real life discourse with voices and faces and the actual kinds of non-perceivable pre-conscious things that occur in person that a lot of us are very removed from. And part of what I'm doing with Theory Underground is attempting to bring together my organic network with the virtual network. And so if you belong to the virtual network and you want to ground out in my organic network and actually get to know me and people that I'm fellow travelers with, like Ann Snellgrove or Brian Weeks or Elton L.K. of the Working Class Intelligentsia, people that I have co-instructed courses with, that I have as sort of connections in real life, you know what I mean? It's going to be these events that are on tour, that are your best way of actually grounding out from the virtual into what I'm calling real life relationships, right? And so hybridity between IRL and fully consumer, algorithmically enticed online, whatever the hell we're doing on here. Ultimately, what I've built here with the app and the website, as well as the publishing arm of all of it, is an opportunity for people to be in an ongoing lecture, research, and publishing cohort, and to be able to ground out in something more real than just the, whatever you get from the algorithm, and that provides the conditions of possibility to go from just being a part of the theory scene, where it's influencers on platforms talking to fans or whatever, to instead become a fellow traveler in an actual intellectual milieu, where whatever you put into it, you'll get back 100-fold. That's what I'm trying to lay the groundwork for here, is the sort of antidote to so many of my frustrations at the university, or trying to organize outside of university, or just trying to be some kind of a YouTuber or whatever. No, so much more important is what's coming from this tour, from this app, from these courses. And so if you're watching this, if you're thinking about getting involved, there's no time like the present, because really it's people's involvement in the first couple of years that makes all the difference. I understand that the longer these PSAs and the more unpolished or underproduced or less frequently published this YouTube channel actually is, the lower engagement is going to be. The algorithms will continuously neglect, right? But it is the people who watch all the way through and to the end who are already pretty serious, and they're looking to potentially get more involved, and that's who I care about. And the channel can ultimately wither away and die, because what's coming from my own platform and from my own medium is something that is capable of something so much more than anything anyone's ever imagined could come out of the internet. And the Timenergy book and the Timenergy course are coming very soon, and a lot of people have been excited about that and have been wanting more on that. And so if you are one of those people who's excited about it, register soon. Go to theory-underground.com, go to the Timenergy course, register for it. There's 4 tiers of involvement. Those who do will separate themselves from those who do not. And it's the doers ultimately that are going to make the difference. So I hope you're one of them, and I'll see you on the other side. Take care. Peace.